Good morning, afternoon. My name is Ted Wells, and I'm Vice President of Client Services at STEMconnector. We are a national organization focused on engaging employers and key educational stakeholders in supporting a robust, equitable, and sustainable STEM workforce through groundbreaking collaborations. Our members include some of the largest employers in the world, leading post-secondary institutions, and innovative non-governmental organizations with global reach. I invite you to learn more about our work by visiting STEMconnector.com and to subscribe to our popular newsletter, The STEM Daily. So first, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this event. We're pleased to welcome you to our first STEM in the World event focused on how STEM will save the planet. It is no secret that climate change is upon us, and we are in a race to ensure that our planet continues to be safe and inhabitable for future generations. In conjunction with Earth Week, today's program brings together a terrific panel of experts to discuss this important issue from their respective fields. I'm pleased to introduce an expert in this field and a good friend of mine, Christiana Martins, who's sitting right next to me, to moderate this panel of experts. A Southern California native, Christiana's career has included working at Disney, supporting their corporate sustainability efforts, and then serving as deputy director for the North American Association for Environmental Education. She currently is founder and CEO of Do Goodery, a social impact agency. Christiana will introduce our expert panel this morning / afternoon, and will surely be this is sure to be an interactive discussion on such a critical issue. Finally, though, before I turn it over to Christiana, I would be remiss if I did not plug our forthcoming ebook that will be coming out in June, focused on this very topic. The resource will support a better understanding of how STEM careers can contribute to saving the planet. And I encourage you to also go to our website and check out our most recent ebook, that STEM Is series, focused on STEM as food and agriculture, that even features one of today's panelists. If you're interested in learning more about these resources, feel free to contact me at ted.wells@stemconnector.com. So without further ado, I am going to mute my microphone and hand it over to my friend Christiana.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ted. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to you wherever you may be in the world. My name is Christiana Martins, and I am so excited to be today's moderator. I'm going to be joined by three super fun, super cool, and just downright impressive women from all different types of industry. And I am going to invite them to introduce themselves because they have quite a story to tell us of what they've done so far in this world. And today we have Dr. Rhonda Hamm from Corteva Agriscience. We have Dr. Tiffany Troxler from Florida International University, and Dr. Suzanne Simons from the National Geographic Society. Like I said, such an impressive group of people. I'm going to invite Rhonda to be our first panelist to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about yourself, about your work, and anything else you think our audience needs to know.
All right, so hi everyone, thank you for joining us here today, and thank you to STEMconnector for having me. So I'm Dr. Rhonda Hamm. A little bit about my background. I'm currently the Global Academic Relations Leader at Corteva Agriscience. And so what does that really mean? I say that I do K through Gray education and outreach. So education and outreach for all ages, and really connecting them with the sciences of food and agriculture. And my background, I have a bachelor's degree in agricultural education. So I was a high school teacher for a period of time before going to graduate school, and have really been involved in education and outreach from the time, really, if I think back from high school on. And so happy to be here, happy to talk a bit more about the impact that agriculture has on our planet and what we're doing to help mitigate some of the challenges that we're facing today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rhonda. And then I'm going to kick it over to Tiffany. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here. I'm at Florida International University in Miami-Dade County. And my role there, I'm an associate professor in the Earth and Environment Department, and also the director of science of our Sea Level Solutions Center. And FIU is a minority serving public research institute, and we work hard to try to uplift and accelerate learner success and foster high social mobility through high research activity. And we've focus in areas of environment, health, innovation, and justice. We have a student body of about 58,000, and we also have an alumni in the range of 260,000. And so I, as I mentioned, work within the Sea Level Solutions Center in the Institute of Environment. And so what we try to do is work with local partners, city and county staff, elected leaders, as well as leaders of community-based organizations to try to develop and apply interdisciplinary science so we can co-create solutions that help us to mitigate the causes and adapt to the consequences of climate change.
Amazing, Tiffany. Thank you. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Suzanne.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us on the panel. So I'm Suzanne Simons from the National Geographic Society. I'm the Senior Director for Content Innovation for Education at the Society. And what that means is we're committed to providing open access resources for educators, youth, and explorers around the world who are looking to solve some of the world's challenges. So we have about 35 million people who use our resources annually. And so we're always trying to figure out the best ways to inspire people to sort of take action to help save our planet. So that's kind of my role there.
Wonderful. Thank you three so much. So as you can all see, we have quite a day or an hour ahead of us. A couple of quick things before we jump into it. Please feel free to start asking questions in the Q&A box because we really do want to hear from you. This is your opportunity to ask questions directly to all three of these panelists. So do not hesitate, and we may even start the Q&A session a lot earlier if we have a lot of questions that are coming in. So let's talk a little bit about this. The theme of this, how STEM will save the planet. And, you know, some people may look at the lineup of panelists and say, I don't understand how these three are all connected. So let's talk a little bit about that. And let's first start with agriculture and Corteva. I think this is such an important topic, especially now, really understanding the impact of agriculture and climate. And then let's talk about how the role that, you know, you, Suzanne and Tiffany play and how you all play together in this space.
Yeah, so I guess I can start with the agriculture piece. So for those of you that might not know Corteva AgriScience, we are an agricultural company, and we focus on really primarily three things: crop protection. So how do we protect our crops from insects, pathogens, weeds, et cetera. And we have our seeds platform. So new technologies within the seeds. How do we make better seeds that maybe are more efficient? And then our digital platform, which includes the data that we can collect on the farm. So how do we make better decisions? How do we use precision agriculture to maybe use less of our crop protection chemistries and less fuel going through the field all at once, you know, to spray an entire field? Maybe we only need to focus on a very small portion because we've actually got digital technologies from either drone or satellite imagery where we can see problems starting much earlier and we can address those problems before they get out of hand. And so I think there's a lot of different things that we can do in agriculture. Of course, another one is there's lots of plants out there, right? Plants capture carbon. So how can we make that more efficient and even better than we are now? And so there are, you know, lots of tools that we are looking at, and we're continuously innovating around that with the product development process in mind to how do we improve from a sustainability standpoint, from an environmental impact standpoint, and really putting that into our pipeline of how we're developing products and what we're actually looking to develop into the future.
Great, thank you, Ron. And I'm just curious to touch on that a little bit further. Where do you see Corteva playing a role in this bigger picture of, you know, a brighter future?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we actually launched our sustainability goals. And so we are a brand new company. So we're only 2 years old in June. So we only have really 1 year under our belt completely. And so we launched those as part of the launch of the company. And so they are split into categories of, you can see the tagline, "In it for good," in my background here. And so there's 4 areas that we're really focused on. One is in it for farmers. And so we know they are our customers. They are the ones that are going to be the solution to the issues, right? And to help us with some of how do we capture carbon? What processes and management practices do we need to change, and how do we help them be successful in that, right? So we know that there's an economic impact for them. They have to be profitable. And so how do we continue to make them profitable and also impact the environment in a way that's sustainable? And so those are some of the things that we're working on for In It for Farmers. How do we make soil better? And so that's In It for the planet. We also have In It for our communities. We know communities have a big part to play in the solution. And then the final one is really internal to us, In It for our operations. So what can we as a company do to help meet these goals? And so all of those have very specific goals underneath them. But to give you kind of a high level overview, those are the areas that we're really focused on, and how do we make changes? And then within each of those, there are goals that are specific to, how much greenhouse gas reductions are we after? What's the percentage? So if you're interested in that, I can pop into the chat the sustainability goals so you can actually see what those actually are. There's 14 of them.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of goals.
There are.
So Tiffany, I'm going to kick it over to you, because I'm trying to understand the big picture of where does big corporations play? Where does academia play? Where do you come in? And let's talk about the work you do around sea level rising. And, let's pretend you and Rhonda sat down for a second to talk about how are you guys going to save the world together? I'm so curious.
That's great. Well, we have sort of a petri dish for collaboration within academia, and in particular working with our local partners, and when we're lucky, our private firms as well. And so we really have the opportunity to work with students in a way that introduces them to the real world effects of climate change and how we can bring together our multiple disciplines to understand how we can address this societal challenge. And from what I see, corporate America, private sector companies really want to be part of this process, and they want to develop product lines, supply chains, institutional operational management that also is returning to the planet. And so what we try to do is develop opportunities for students to work within the STEM disciplines to be able to apply their training to understanding how they can apply their knowledge to support these endeavors that was really exciting to see private corporations taking on now with gusto, I would say.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the narrative is changing so much with this idea of public-private partnerships. And, now, Suzanne, I'm looking at you and just thinking about that staggering number that 35 million people you reach every year with your educational resources. So I had the good fortune of being a National Geographic Explorer myself, and it was a delight. And I got to work with the best team of people at National Geographic. So where do you fit in all of this work, and really thinking about how National Geographic is working towards the same goals as Rhonda and Tiffany, but in totally different capacity?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So we're really looking at large scale change and how to do that across the world. I think we all know sort of now more than ever, the planet really needs all of our help. So we have 4 ways of doing that here. Our mission is to use science, storytelling, exploration, and education. And that set of 4 kind of supports to help sort of illuminate and protect the world. So what we do is we're investing now in large communities of change makers. So people who are really curious and creative and want to find solutions. We provide grants to explorers like yourself. So we've done about over 14,000 grants across all 7 continents. We support large global change projects such as Pristine Seas, which now I think has done 31 expeditions around the world, protected 6 million square kilometers of water, and created 23 marine reserves. We support storytelling. So we launched a set of COVID grants this year for journalists during COVID who are really working on providing local coverage of the pandemic and some of the inequities that are coming out of it. Like you said, our goals are big. In education, we have even bigger goals than that number I said before. So our goal by 2030 is to equip 2.5 million educators with resources and content. have 100 million young people cultivating empathy for the earth and inspiring 5 million young people into taking real leadership roles in terms of looking for solutions to global challenges. The other thing we're really committed to right now is equity, and knowing that we here have not always sort of valued everyone's stories equally in the past. And so we're really working to sort of confront the racist practices and oppressive systems that are found in science exploration and any kind of sort of system. So that's kind of the big landscape for us. I think for me personally, I'm a disciplinarian. So what I'm really interested in is how can we translate the sort of authentic practices that Tiffany and Rhonda are describing into resources for young people to be able to do the same kind of real authentic STEM work that professionals are doing. And how can we get that to younger kids around the world?
Thanks for that, Suzanne. So I find it, as you just said, Tiffany, you're so impressed by how companies are taking this kind of work on with gusto. And you think about Corteva and National Geographic, and even Florida International is a huge organization. So I would love to hear sort of maybe from the three of you. I've in my career so far, I've always noticed that there's quite a bit of competition in science, as there is also collaboration. And it feels like collaboration is more important now than ever. And it's a perfect example with the vaccine, how quickly we were able to turn around this vaccine in a year. And that really required a lot of egos and a lot of big bosses to come together and make it happen. But look where we are a year later. So I'd love to hear, and I'd welcome any of you to take this question first, but how do you see the power of collaboration in playing a role in changing the world?
Well, I'll start. Yeah, I mean, it's such an important question, and I would say that every research activity that I have the opportunity to see real transdisciplinary outcomes is when we have people across disciplines that can communicate with each other and can and also are able to collaborate with one another, but also having that shared vision at the outset that we're all about trying to understand how, let's say, we can improve the resilience outcomes of investments in Miami-Dade County when we're trying to build urban resilience. And we're trying to think very carefully about how those are not only infrastructure outcomes that we're looking at, that we're looking at social outcomes and environmental outcomes, so that while we're making investments, we can improve the quality of life of people that live here. And there's no way to do that and to really grapple with societal challenges unless you have all perspectives and all disciplines at the table. And geez, by no means is that an easy endeavor. Because, in part because, we work, so we work well together, working well together across disciplines within academia. And then there's also working across institutions, which, we've got academia working with, government and community-based organizations. And then we try to take that information and make that and try to work with community members or business owners or, just everyday residents like myself to try to understand how we can take it a step further to ensure that what we're doing is taking, really relevant to the individuals that will be living their lives where we're trying to, develop resilience, let's say. So there are many levels. It's a lot of work. It requires strong partnerships and trust and just showing up all the time. But there's nothing more rewarding though. And for the STEM field, just as important as that disciplinary science is being able to communicate it and be able to, collaborate across those disciplines and to think about how and maybe this is just my personal opinion, but think about how we can apply it to address interests and challenges that our society faces as a community.
Yeah, and I'll add, collaboration is absolutely key, right? So in those sustainability goals that I mentioned that we created a year ago, or launched a year ago, I should say, it took us over a year to establish those. And that was because we had to do our due diligence, and it wasn't the Corteva goals there. Those were goals that we sat down with our communities around the world. So we operate in over 120 countries. So understanding what are the differences between what is needed in the Midwest agriculture of the US versus in sub-Saharan Africa, or in our sites in Brazil, for example. And crops are also different, right? And so looking at who are the people that are going to be impacted the most, how do we help them? What are they looking for? And really listening. It all starts with, the collaboration starts with listening. If you just go in and say, hey, here's the solution, you need to implement it, you're not going to get very far, right? You have to have buy-in, you have to have a partnership, and you have to build trust. And so that's the way we look at all of our projects, but especially around sustainability and how do we change practices that have been done for many years. And farming has only been successful because they have done it right. So if we completely use up the land and we can't use it anymore, then that farmer is out of business. That, family no longer can pass that down to their next generation. Lots of farms are family farms. And so, how do we help them be more successful, and what do they need? And the only way we're going to understand that is by listening and partnering with our customers, with our community partners, with families, right? Of what do you want on your table? So, agriculture is being driven by consumers as well. And so having consumers at the table, there's no end to the number of people that we could impact, because food impacts everyone, right? And so having everyone have a voice to what do we need to do differently, and how are we going to help enable that and empower that. The other thing that I love, because of my role in global academic relations, is I get to work with youth. And so how can they be part of the solution? It's not just us adults that are, at the later stages of our careers that can really have an impact. It's that you can do this anytime, right? It takes a passion. It may take some help from someone, but you don't have to wait until a certain age or a certain career to have an impact. You can have an impact on your local communities today. And so I think that's another thing that, in collaborations and in working with different people, you can come up with those solutions together.
So I would love to talk a little bit about STEM skills and STEM talent, because there's always talk about the pipeline, and there at times can be an assumption that STEM skills means that you have to be a technologist, you have to be a scientist in the lab, that, and we all know on this call that STEM skills can mean so much more. And how would you encourage a young person to think about whether it's going into agriculture or going into a lab? But can you describe a little bit more about what a STEM skill actually is, so that it doesn't feel so unattainable to people that are not going to be a scientist, they're not going to be a technologist, but they can do so many other things that have equal contribution to this movement?
So maybe I can start with that, because one of the things we work really hard on is actually exactly this. We call it developing an explorer mindset, right? Which is really an articulation of the attributes of exploration, curiosity, problem solving, responsibility toward community and planet, all of those kinds of things. And I think that those are not unique to people who are going to go into STEM careers or not, right? I mean, we're really hoping that people get interested about the way the planet works and the way that they could impact it in their local area. But I do think that one of the things we're hoping, for example, through the Global Expert Network, is to be able to connect young people who are thinking about their curiosity or about the world to different experts to help them sort of navigate choices that they might make. in fields they might explore. So for example, Rhonda, I don't know if everybody even knows about your field, right? So it would be terrific if more young people really did know about it, so they would have that opportunity to think about how they might contribute in new and different ways. So that's the way we describe it, is really investing in an explorer mindset for anybody and everybody.
And thanks for that lead in, Suzanne. I will actually say that I'm a product of that myself. So I'm an entomologist. For those of you that may not know what an entomologist is, I studied insects, and I had no idea that that was a career option until someone spent the time and showed me. I actually was assigned to an entomology lab in high school for an internship and was terrified. This was not something I was looking forward to. This was not something that was on my plan. In fact, total opposite. But having someone spend the time and see me as a young individual in high school that was treated as a scientist, not as a pair of hands to do dishes, but as a scientist, that empowerment completely changed my career trajectory. And I could see myself as a scientist. So I think providing opportunities to hear students first of what do they want to accomplish, what are they interested in, and even if they're interested in something, just that exposure to other things, I think is important. And then empowering them to say, you can have a voice, you can have an influence, you can do this project, was, for me, life-changing. That's why I'm an entomologist today, is because I had that opportunity of someone sort of saying, here's a project, it's going to be your project, you are the scientist, you're going to, do all the studying and create the report. And for me, that was how I got into it. But I think even more so from the topic that we're talking about here today is, this is not going to be one person's job. So it's not going to be the responsibility of the sustainability person at the company or at the university or in these organizations to solve climate change, right? It's going to be a part of all of our jobs, regardless of what role we end up in. So if you are in marketing and sales, you still have a role to play in mitigating these climate change events, right? So what are the things that you can do where you are? And I think that's the skill that comes into play, is just that problem solving of, regardless of where you sit in any organization or at any age, what can I do today to change the outcome of the future?
Rhonda, you're reminding me. So one of the things I think that is exciting about some of the new technologies is the ability for anyone and everyone to participate. So we've also really been supporting citizen science and citizen participation in science, where anybody around the world through various apps and technologies can collect data in their backyard or in their house or out their window, right? And contribute to scientific research, which is, I think, exciting based on what you just said, right? Which is, young people don't always know that they can be part of science, that they can be part of STEM, and that they can do that sort of just every day from their phones.
So I'm going to jump in with a couple of audience questions because we have some interesting ones that are relevant to this conversation. And Tiffany, I'm going to start with you. How you had talked about FIU working with historically underrepresented young people and an audience. So how are you intentionally engaging students and people from marginalized and underrepresented communities so that they become more familiar with STEM career options and opportunities?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the citizen science that we get to do within the within the university in the Institute of Environment. And I think one of the most amazing things about citizen science is seeing people make observations and seeing things click in their head. So without a test or, some kind of other way to evaluate that our students from whatever walk of life they come are, putting things together and really connecting climate change to what's happening on the ground and how they can be part of that solution is just an extraordinary opportunity. Working at a place like a global city that's grappling with some pretty significant impacts of climate change and the population changing so rapidly, but also, pretty significant prosperity gap. I mean, Miami-Dade County is struggling with some significant issues in that regard. And so making education and those kinds of experiential opportunities available to anyone that wants to sign up is pretty exciting. And there are a number of programs across FIU's campuses where social scientists and historians and folks from other fields are really digging into trying to use some of the same types of methodologies and engagement strategies that Suzanne spoke about to try to make a stronger connection with marginalized communities, so those priorities can be represented in all of the work that's going on and going forward as we continue to grapple with big changes in our environment that are being brought by climate as well as globalization.
So Rhonda, you have a question specifically around urban farming. And this which is so impressive, and it's so, we work with a lot of urban farm organizations, and the question is, what do you think about the movement of urban farmers and as a way to work with STEM competencies?
Yeah, so I think those are great partnerships. School gardens, urban gardens that might be in the community. For us, it's a great way for urban centers that may never have the opportunity to get to a large farm to have that experience. And, there's lots of studies that'll show that if you've been intimately involved in growing a crop, you're more likely to eat healthier, right? And try new things because you spent so much time and energy to grow this, I don't know, name your favorite crop, eggplant. You may never have eaten an eggplant in your life, don't even know how to cook it, but somebody can teach you how to do that, right? You're more willing to try it. And so I think those all play into kind of what we were talking about earlier with having that experience, right? That experience that can change your opinion, your impression, and just give you ownership of something, right? You've grown this thing from a seed up to a plant, up to a fruit, or up to, a vegetable that you can then eat. So you've watched an entire life cycle, you've invested in that thing. But what I think we don't often recognize is you're also investing in yourself when you're doing that. So the students that are part of that, the teachers that are part of that, the community partners that are part of that. And again, it goes back to our original question of those interrelationships and those partnerships. And I think those are all very successful ways to introduce agriculture to a much broader view that may never see agriculture in any other way other than, food grows on a grocery store. I don't actually know how it gets there. I don't actually know what the plant looks like that it's produced, So having that opportunity, I think, is just an introduction, and then talking through, how those things impact our global world, right? And so kind of to your previous question, one of the things that we've learned through urban gardens and our community gardens that we support and have ourselves is, thinking through how do we get everyone involved in that? So we may have an impression from our culture, what should belong in the garden, but do we consider the culture of the community around us of what kinds of fruits and vegetables are recognizable to them and other communities outside of your own? And do you plant those purposefully? So I think there are opportunities to even take community gardens and urban gardens to another level to ensure that we're kind of wrapping our arms around the entire community so they feel like, hey, this garden is for me too. It's not, I have to fit into the garden space, but the garden space fits into me and my life. So I think there's some things that we can do there to kind of connect a bunch of different questions that we've already had into one answer. So.
Access is such a big issue right now, and COVID once again has demonstrated the great disparity and divide in our society, particularly here in the US. Can any of you give me some specific examples of what you were doing to create better accessibility for communities that may not have any type of access to these kind of programs, or be doing an urban garden or anything like that?
So I can give us an example. So we have what we call a Harvest for Hunger garden on our facility. And so we grow fruits, vegetables, plants throughout the summer. We actually had our biggest year ever last year, and we planted additional acres, not acres, but space, let's say, not acres. And we provided that food to local food pantries. So we were producing that food and getting it to the communities where it was in most need. Another thing that we did in response to the pandemic is, in March, it was sort of all shut down all at once. Teachers didn't have time to prepare. Students didn't have time to prepare. Parents didn't have time to prepare. And it was all kind of immediate. And so we knew that not every student was going to have access to be able to connect virtually. Even if the school could, not every student could. And so we worked with some of our community partners to say, how can we get something into the hands of students that will have nothing otherwise? And so we actually, because we have our food organization and we have great partnerships with local food pantries, we worked with our food banks and food pantries to say, can we provide you some activity books, coloring books, anything, just to get something into the hands of the kids that have nothing at this point. They don't have the technology available to them at this time. The schools were working on getting that as quickly as they could, but it took time. And so we were able to partner with some of our local food pantries to provide some of that material to them quickly so that students had access. The other thing that we did, not right away because we needed a little time ourselves, but we eventually did, is made sure that those materials were not just only in English, that they were in Spanish, that they were in Portuguese and French and other languages, so that we could impact broader communities and ensure that, again, that feeling of I'm included here and that it's accessible, right?
So we had a similar experience, Rhonda. The one thing I'll say is that one of the things we definitely learned from the pandemic is kids don't always have access through computers or laptop devices, but that lots of kids have phones. And so one of the big things that we've been working on is an anytime, anywhere, any device sort of lens, which is how do we make sure that all of our stuff is accessible through mobile devices, so that even when there are no computers or there's no access to any type of laptops, that kids have access through phones and teachers have access through phones, and that those things are downloadable so that when their Wi-Fi is not available, then they still have access to materials and stuff. So I think that that's been an interesting lesson of the pandemic, is it's not just lack of access, but it's lack of type of access. And so how do we consider that and how we make things available?
So, there's definitely a theme in some of the questions here, again, around accessibility and access. I guess one big question is all three of you work for very big organizations, and there are a lot of big organizations out there that have incredible opportunity to have an impact. How do you move past the barrier of, it costs a lot of money, there's not a huge ROI at the end of the day, at least in the beginning of it, right? The long-term ROI is very different. What are some recommendations? Because we have some interesting attendees from various industries here who represent big organizations. How do you get past that? Because it can be seen as political, it can be seen as a lot of things. So I think it would be really interesting for the audience to hear, how do you inspire that within? Because if you have support from the top, that's when things start to change.
Align to the values of your company. I think if you can show that alignment of here's why we're doing it and how it aligns to our mission, our vision, our purpose statement, that helps a ton get it to the point where, no, this is really a truly valued activity, and this is worth the investment and worth the time and the energy of our people to make sure it's done right. I also think that there's a societal pressure now too. Companies can no longer just say that this isn't important to us. It's important to everybody and needs to be important to us. And so we have to do the right thing here.
I mean, Rhonda, what you're sort of talking about is, what does citizenship mean in this day and age, right? And what does citizenship mean in relationship to things like climate change, which can be very politicized, but can also be very personal and local, and so therefore not very politicized, because every one of us is being affected by it. So I think I would, just say here to what you just said. So this work really needs to be mission central, to be honest. And for us, that's really about, what does citizenship mean in the 21st century?
Yeah, I'll only add to that, but also trying to get that story out into the public. You may not have the ROI to show at the front end, but if you can tell the story about how, you saw students really connecting the dots in this, tiny experiential, exploration that they were able to undertake, or, how the partnership with a city or a county is they're talking about how it's so important to the work that they do, really starts to sort of build the momentum to be able to better show that mission alignment, and really excited about one particular opportunity at FIU is that we're recognized at the state level as an environmental resilience, a place where we can study environmental resilience within and at an international level, both locally and trying to think about it at an international level as well. So to see that iteration happen also helps to keep us as faculty, excited about continuing to tell those stories with what the next new venture is.
I totally agree with you. And it's sort of circling back to something you said earlier in one of the questions earlier about what is collaboration and what's important about collaboration. And I think for us, having storytelling as one of our 4 pillars is for that reason, right? Which is that storytelling can absolutely sort of exponentially catalyze the impact of science and exploration, and as education can do. So I think you're right, is telling the stories of this can really change the world.
So Tiffany, I'd also like to hear a little bit more about your climate justice work. It really seems to be a pillar of your work, and thinking about how you talk about climate issues to such a broad audience, and how do you move the needle, and how do you get people to feel like they're part of this as well, and it doesn't feel like some separate movement for wealthy people, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would say, that work really has come from the citizen science work that we've done, and that work really wouldn't be possible without strong community-based organization partnerships. For example, we work pretty closely with a group called Catalyst Miami, and they conduct climate leadership trainings across Miami-Dade County, and their alumni become local leaders and ambassadors to help raise awareness and learning within their smaller communities, and being able to connect the science in a way that brings those leaders out into the field, that then those leaders connect with our local communities, those individuals that otherwise would not be able to connect with that process, simply because we don't always have the same access that some of our partners do. So that's one of the reasons why, partnerships, among 100 other reasons, that's why we build partners, because we're trying to build our collective capacity. And then seeing how those community-based organizations use that science to help move policy locally And in particular, working with CBOs that their central mission is to help to reduce impacts of climate change on historically marginalized communities, is where the science and the partnerships and the collaboration and that translating to policy and then actual projects that are then reducing heat exposure for individuals is just so exciting. When it fully comes together like that, that's just really amazing. And so that's what I would say is that but I'm just one small individual in a much larger organization, and there are other faculty doing really amazing climate justice work, our Metropolitan Center, but it just, yeah, I wish we could have a couple other of my colleagues on here. But yeah, that's just one example. Thanks.
No, you're awesome, Tiffany. So no, thank you. That was great. And, it has me thinking about storytelling. That seems to be a theme here in the conversation as well. Suzanne, I'd love to hear from you where you think storytelling plays a role in breaking down some of these barriers around climate issues.
Well, one of the things we're really working on is the question of who gets to tell the story or whose stories are getting told, right? I mean, that's the sort of fundamental basis of this. And in exploration, we often tell the stories of explorers, but less often tell the stories of the people whose problems are being explored, right? And so that's one of the things we're really trying to think about. We had at our recent storytelling summit, we had a wonderful storyteller from South Africa describing putting cameras into the hands of South African movie directors and documentary people, and having people sort of film their own stories. And the punchline of it is, if you want to change the story, you change the storyteller. And I think that's what we're working on, certainly in the education department, is how we give access to many more storytellers, so that there aren't specific narratives that are, hogging or directing or just basically bullying out other stories.
And, I would be curious because again, the three of you are representing such different sort of industry. And, I would love to hear from you. Do you have any examples of like your most unlikely partnership that you've had, that you created, and that just created something that blew your mind that you never expected? And I will leave that to any one of you three to answer, all of you.
I don't know that if it's super unexpected, but we have a partnership with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, as well as 4-H. And so we have partnered with them to install pollinator habitats throughout the US. And so that one's been great. Pheasants Forever and Pollinator and Quail Forever get the habitats established for bird restoration, but also there's the pollinator impact, and then there's the youth impact of the youth are the ones that are learning how to do this. They're actually engaged in creating those habitats. And so I think those, like I said, I'm not sure it's an unexpected partnership, but it definitely has been a successful one for us that we've enjoyed for sure. Maybe another one that's maybe not as obvious is the connections that we are making with supply chain throughout. So we are working with everyone from the Nature Conservancy through to the food companies. And so food companies are all creating sustainability goals, but in order to enable them and empower them to meet their goals, it has to be done on the farm, right? And so there's that connection too. So maybe that's a more unexpected one, is that, we're trying to connect throughout the entire supply chain, from on the farm, farmers growing the food, to the manufacturer that's producing that into the package that you buy off of the shelf in the grocery store. And so talking through that entire supply chain and saying, okay, where can we make sustainability gains and climate positive initiatives throughout that process? I think is one that we're still working on, to be honest, to try to figure out, okay, what are those concrete things that we're going to change? But that's going to be a very powerful partnership with having everybody talking throughout the supply chain.
Any other thoughts from Tiffany?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if, well, you know, it's not unsurprising that we would work with public health professionals, but one group in particular is the, you know, clinicians. And there's a group called the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, and you know, they think very carefully from the perspective of public health and social determinants of health at a very individual level, and trying to connect the types of environmental data that we often collect, you know, let's say in the urban environment about heat or flooding or particulate matter, and understanding how that group connects with their community, and how that relationship maybe differs from how an elected official engages with their community, or an academic, as you know, connects with their community, and learning from the differences, learning from the gaps between those types of partnerships has been eye-opening for me. But you know, it's really fun to identify new opportunities for partnerships, and you know, just try to think, okay, you know, where are we really struggling in terms of this, that, or the other? And that's I think one really fun attribute of collaboration is it really pushes you to think, you know, at the boundary, to try to, you know, overcome those barriers, as you mentioned earlier, Christiane, in the discussion.
Thank you. Those are great answers. And we're going to ask this one last question before we have you sort of say your final goodbyes. But so we said this audience member said, excellent questions and answers. Thank you. I am curious how you are reaching out to administrators or departments of education throughout the U.S. to encourage pursuing your resources as a mean to grow students. The time constraints forced upon teachers and limited innovative funding to meet specific content skills certainly limits teachers of underserved populations to incorporate meaningful opportunities. While all of us here are like-minded, I just want to know how you are pushing educational change and reform to shift mindsets on growing students, or how you support student growth on state assessment. I feel like, Suzanne, that might be you, but I don't want to make assumptions.
Yeah, that's right up our alley. So I think we're approaching this in two different ways. The first is that it seems a shame to us to continue to develop resources for systems that are working so poorly for lots of kids, and that maybe instead of going that direction, what we should be doing is looking at innovation in all kinds of fields and figuring out different ways of learning and providing resources and support for those that school systems and teachers and administrators can then take on. So that's the kind of like grand idea, right? I think the practical point of the question is, it is so true. Teachers don't have any time. Systems don't have a lot of resources. And for us looking at things globally, every system has different values, different standards, different purposes, and different ways of doing things, including this thing we call schooling, right? So I think that one of the big things that we're really trying to do is simplify what we provide so that it really is the core resources around the things that we as National Geographic can uniquely add value to. Right? So not trying to do everything educationally. We can't provide everything a teacher might need for full STEM curriculum for 180 days of learning with all the standards baked in. But what we can do is provide the things that we really know well and are expert in: exploration, inquiry, citizen science, geospatial thinking and mapping, like the things that National Geographic really knows, and that it's simplifying in order to make things much easier for people to take into whatever it is their requirements of their system demand of them. So that's kind of our two-pronged approach.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. So the questions are, of course, are like coming in at the very end, but we are getting close to wrapping up our hour. So hopefully, maybe in your wrap up of today's conversation, I would love to hear from you. What inspires you to do this every day? And what is one piece of advice you would give your audience, whether it's educators, it's students, it's corporate partners? You can choose who that audience is, but let us know who it is. And I would love to hear from you. So Rhonda, let's just go in the same order we started in.
Oh no, you give the hardest question to me to go first. I don't have time to think. Yeah, so I think, just do it. I guess is kind of my advice, is you've got to start somewhere. So don't feel like you're going to solve all of the problems all at once. That's not realistic, right? But you can have an impact. And so whatever that thing is that makes you tick, find that and find a way to make that your thing that you contribute, right? So that's not very eloquently put right now, but I think you're getting the gist of what I'm trying to say there. And so, some start is better than no start. And so, small impacts can have a big difference over time. And so just getting out there and not being afraid to get something done. And it's scary to sort of turn over the reins, especially if you're in the education realm, to your students, but don't be afraid to do that. I think you'll be very surprised by what students will come up with, and the passions that they have and the power that they have to actually change. They're the ones that are going to solve these problems, let's face it. And so let's empower them to start early and start learning, how do they ask those questions and how do they look for partners themselves, right? So I guess that would be my advice is don't be afraid to loosen the reins and let the students sort of go solve some of these problems, because they'll surprise you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Tiffany.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just say that, just bouncing off of Rhonda, the students inspire me. They, I get the opportunity, I have the opportunity to teach a class called Sustainability in Action. And when they, take their ideas and put it into something that's tangible and really can see how those individual actions scale up to, global sustainability solutions, it just blows my mind. But yeah, and I would say persevere, similar to Rhonda, but just, if things are not, don't give up. It's, if you're really pushing the envelope and you're having trouble, that means you're doing something right. So just keep at it. And that's for everyone.
All right, Suzanne, take us home.
You want me to go? You've said it all. No, I would say the thing that really inspires me is that, rich kids, I believe that rich kids and poor kids are asked to do different types of thinking in their daily lives and at school. And I think both what Rhonda and Tiffany said is exactly right. I think that if we approach engaging in the world through the perspective of wonderment and curiosity and problem solving, you put problems in front of kids and they're going to figure it out, as they've both said. So I think the question is, how do we open opportunities to think about those problems to every young person on the planet? So that's the goal.
Ladies, that hour went by just like that. Thank you. And I like to say we had high retention rate on our attendees, which is always a great sign. So thank you to our audience for joining us as well. And if you liked what you saw here, you should check out the Nobel Prize Our Planet, Our Future Summit next week. It's going to be really exciting. It's a 2-day event and global event. And Rhonda, Tiffany, Suzanne, thank you so much for your time. You ladies were amazing. And I hope I get to see you in person in one of these days. So, and that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to, no, I'm not turning it back over to Ted. So to the audience, to our panelists, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.